Emma Carson never expected trouble to arrive on a chilly October morning. Yet the moment she opened her front door and found Alex standing there, her husband, Daniel's nephew, she felt the day tilt in a way she couldn't name. Emma lived in Maple Ridge, a quiet town where people noticed everything, especially when marriage troubles lingered in the air like a cold breeze. She had been carrying the weight of a fading relationship for months, pretending not to see how Daniel had become distant, how their evenings had turned into polite exchanges and forced smiles. She missed the man who once laughed easily and held her hand without thinking. She missed the warmth between them. But life had slowly built a quiet wall between their hearts, and neither of them had found the courage to tear it down. That morning, when Alex arrived, shaking lightly as if he'd been standing in the cold too long, Emma sensed something serious. Alex was only 22, usually cheerful and eager. But today his eyes carried a heavy worry she had never seen in him before. He held an envelope close to his chest, like it contained something fragile. Emma invited him inside, and he stepped into the living room with the uncertain steps of someone afraid of what came next. He didn't sit until she gently motioned for him to. When he finally spoke, his voice wavered. "Aunt Emma, I need your help." He handed her the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should feel, as if it carried a truth that could not be ignored. Alex didn't explain right away. He just waited, breathing slow, eyes shining with something between fear and hope. When Emma opened the envelope, she found a handwritten letter addressed to Daniel. The signature at the bottom made her breath catch. Daniel's sister, Laura, the woman he had avoided for more than 10 years. Emma had only heard bits of their story through careful half-sentences and silences that lasted too long. Whatever happened between them had been painful enough that Daniel refused to talk about it. Laura's name was like a locked door in their marriage, one she had never had permission to open. Now it was sitting in her hands. The letter was simple but heartbreaking. Laura was ill, and she wanted to see her brother. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and she didn't try to explain the past. She only wanted one thing: to see him before it was too late. Emma felt a warmth rise in her face, the kind that comes when fear and sympathy press against each other. She looked up at Alex, who swallowed hard before speaking again. "He won't listen to me," Alex said softly. "I tried." He shut down. "But he listens to you, or at least he used to." His voice cracked on the last words. Emma felt a sad ache in her chest. She wasn't sure Daniel listened to her anymore. Their conversations had become short, their emotions quiet, their closeness fading into a comfortable but painful distance. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It was a slow disconnect that neither of them had known how to stop. She wasn't even sure she could still reach the deepest parts of him. But Alex believed she could, and something in his eyes begged her not to fail him. She promised she would try. When Alex left, she stood in the kitchen alone, holding the letter like it might crumble if she squeezed too hard. The house felt quieter than usual, the air thick with the weight of old memories and unspoken questions. The refrigerator hummed softly, the clock ticked, and somewhere in the distance she heard a dog barking. Everything felt normal except her heart, which beat with uneasy urgency. She didn't know whether showing Daniel the letter would break him open or shut him down completely. She only knew she had to try. That evening, Daniel came home from work, tired, distracted, and worn in the way a person looks after carrying years of unspoken burdens. He offered her a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She waited until he set down his keys, until he loosened his tie, until the silence between them felt too deep to ignore. Then she said, "There's something you need to see." Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands did. Daniel looked at the envelope, then at her, frowning with confusion. When he opened it and read the letter, the expression on his face changed slowly, like a storm gathering across a calm sky. His shoulders tightened. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened with remembered pain. He didn't say her sister's name, but Emma saw it in the way he froze. "Why now?" he murmured, barely audible. He looked lost, not angry. Lost in a way that made her heart soften. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his hand, hoping he would let her in. But Daniel pulled away gently, not rejecting her, but protecting himself from the past that had just been thrown back into his present. And it was in that quiet moment that Emma realized the truth she had been avoiding. Whatever wounds Daniel carried from his past had shaped the distance in their marriage, building a barrier neither of them had fully seen. Helping him might reopen old pain, and for a moment she feared it might cost them whatever fragile connection they had left. But she also knew something else's letter. This moment, this unexpected visit from Alex was not just about Daniel's past. It was about their future. Whether they healed together or broke apart might depend on what happened next. Emma didn't know where the story would go, but she felt something deep inside her shift. She wasn't just holding a letter anymore. She was holding the first crack in the wall that had grown between them. And that meant she had to be brave. Emma sat at the kitchen table long after Alex had left. The envelope from Daniel's sister resting between her hands like it held not just paper but a key to something long lost. The letter had stirred a storm inside her she hadn't expected, an uneasy mixture of fear, hope, and longing. She knew Daniel had walls built from years of pain, and now those walls were facing a threat, a chance at reconnection. And she was the one standing in the middle of it. For the first time in months, she felt a pulse of purpose. A feeling she had forgotten in the monotony of silent dinners and separate rooms. Taking a deep breath, she unfolded the letter again. Tracing the neat handwriting as if reading it slowly could somehow soften Daniel's stubborn heart. Laura's words were simple, but they carried a gravity that Emma felt deep in her chest. She wanted to see him. She was ill, and she didn't want to let more time slip away. Emma's mind raced. She knew Daniel would resist. He always did, preferring the comfort of avoidance over the risk of emotional pain. But if she didn't act, if she didn't show him this letter herself, there was a chance that he would never see it, and she couldn't allow that. She felt a flicker of responsibility, a warmth of influence she hadn't realized she still had over him. She replayed Alex's words in her head, his hope and desperation all rolled into one small frame. He won't listen to me. He listens to you. Emma wished she had the confidence Alex had, but she did know that Daniel still cared about her opinions, her judgment, her voice even if he had stopped trusting it entirely. That thought made her chest tighten. Because along with the hope came the old ache she carried for the man she still loved. A man who seemed farther away than ever, but whom she couldn't stop thinking about. When Daniel walked in later that evening, tired from work and distant in the way that had become normal, Emma felt the moment crackle with tension and possibility. She didn't hand him the letter right away. She waited, letting him drop his bag and loosen his tie. Letting the room stretch with a silence that spoke louder than words. Her heart thumped, and she felt the familiar fear of rejection. Would he read it? Would he shut her out? Finally, she placed the letter gently on the table in front of him and said, "There's something you need to see." Daniel looked at her, and for a second, the years of distance seemed to dissolve as he registered the envelope. Curiosity mixed with dread crossed his face as he picked it up and slowly unfolded the paper. Emma watched him, noticing every small change, the tightening of his jaw, the way his shoulders rose and fell, the faint tremor in his hand. His eyes darkened with emotion as he read, and for a moment he seemed transported back in time. Two memories Emma hadn't been allowed to see. "Why now?" he murmured, his voice low, rough with emotion he rarely shared. Emma's chest ached at the sound. She reached out instinctively, letting her hand hover near his, feeling the pull of years of longing and silence. He didn't take it, didn't reject it, but the barrier was still there, fragile and tentative. Emma realized the power of the letter. It wasn't just about a request from a sister. It was about opening a door to honesty, to feeling, to connection. She remembered their own conversations, or the lack thereof, and understood that this small piece of paper had the potential to spark a change, to peel back layers of avoidance and fear that had built up over years. The room seemed charged, every second stretching longer as she watched Daniel process the words. Emma thought about Alex, about the courage it took for a young man to trust her with this responsibility, to believe she could reach Daniel when he himself could not. That thought inspired her, gave her strength. She knew now that she could not wait for Daniel to come around on his own. She had to act. She had to find the right words, the right touch, the right moment to bridge the distance that had grown between them. But at the same time, she feared that pushing too hard might close the door entirely, that Daniel might retreat further into himself. And she might lose him not only for now, but for good. Emma reflected on the years they had spent together. The laughter, the dreams, the quiet moments that had once made life feel full. Those memories weren't gone. They were still there, buried under hurt and unspoken words. She decided she would reach for them, for him, for the chance at healing that seemed so fragile yet vital. As Daniel read the letter, Emma could see the cracks in his armor forming, small and hesitant, but there nonetheless. She felt a spark of hope, a delicate thread connecting them after months of cold distance. The emotions swirling inside her were complex fear, longing, hope, and love all mixed together, but Emma knew that she couldn't ignore them, couldn't retreat into the comfort of silence. She had to act, even if it meant facing Daniel's pain head-on, even if it meant risking her own heart in the process. Finally, Daniel looked up, eyes meeting hers, raw and honest in a way that made her breath catch. There was hesitation, but there was also recognition, a flicker of trust and vulnerability that Emma had been waiting to see. It wasn't a complete breakthrough, not yet, but it was enough to show her that the door was open, that the moment had arrived. Emma felt a swell of emotion, a mixture of relief and anticipation, realizing that the letter had done what she alone could not. It had brought the past into the present, forcing Daniel to confront it, to feel it, and maybe, just maybe, to take the first step toward healing. She knew the days ahead would be complicated, filled with difficult conversations and emotional reckonings, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready. She understood that this was bigger than her fear, bigger than the distance that had grown between them. It was about love, about family, about courage, and about the chance to mend what had been broken. The evening stretched on, quiet yet full of tension and possibility. As Emma and Daniel sat in the dim light, both aware that their lives were about to change, Emma felt the weight of responsibility, but also the thrill of hope. She knew that what came next would test them both. But she also knew that this was the moment they had been waiting for, even if neither had realized it until now. As she watched Daniel fold the letter carefully and tuck it back into its envelope, Emma felt a quiet determination settle in her chest. She would guide him, support him, and, if necessary, lead him to face what he had avoided for years. And in that resolve, she found something unexpected, a spark of connection, a sense that maybe, just maybe, their hearts could find each other again. Emma understood that the journey wouldn't be easy, that it would demand patience, courage, and trust, but she was ready to step into it. The first step had been taken, and she could feel the subtle shift in the room. The momentary bridge between past regrets and future possibilities. It was fragile, delicate, but alive, and for Emma, that was enough. She didn't know exactly what Daniel would say or do next, but she knew she had opened a door. And once a door was open, anything was possible. She held on to that thought as she sat quietly, feeling both the weight and the promise of what was to come, knowing that the story of their lives and perhaps their love was on the brink of change. Asterisk. Emma woke up the next morning with a quiet determination she hadn't felt in months, the letter still weighing on her mind and heart. Knowing that waiting any longer would only let the distance between her and Daniel grow, she moved through the house quickly, almost on autopilot, gathering a few things she thought they might need for a trip she hadn't planned, but now felt necessary. Daniel was still in bed when she went into the room, and she watched him for a moment, noticing how the light from the window caught the faint lines of worry on his face, the slump in his shoulders that spoke of years carrying unspoken pain. "Daniel," she said softly, placing her hand on his arm, "I'm going." He opened his eyes slowly, confusion and surprise flickering across them. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. Emma didn't hesitate. "I mean, I can't wait for you to decide. I can't let this go. I'm going to see your sister." She wants to see you, and I can't let her face this alone." Daniel sat up, rubbing his face, his brow furrowed as if trying to understand the sudden seriousness in her tone. "You don't have to," he murmured, almost pleading, as if the thought of stepping into the past terrified him. But Emma shook her head. "Someone has to. And right now, that someone is me." Her words carried conviction he hadn't heard in years, the quiet strength that had always drawn him to her, now guiding both of them toward a path he didn't yet understand. He stayed silent for a long moment, then finally spoke, a small sigh escaping his lips. "If you're going, then I'm coming," he said, and Emma felt her chest lift with relief, knowing she had broken through just enough for him to take a step toward courage. The preparations were quick: a packed bag, car keys, the map Emma had pulled out with tentative planning, and soon they were driving north. The morning sun casting long golden streaks across the streets of Maple Ridge. The silence in the car was different this time. Not tense or awkward, but filled with anticipation. A fragile space for emotions they hadn't shared in months. Emma stole glances at Daniel, noticing how his jaw set, how his fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel. A nervous habit she remembered from when they had first met, before life had worn away the ease between them. She didn't speak immediately, letting the road stretch between them, letting the quiet prepare them for what awaited. After an hour, she finally said, "I think this will help. Not just for her, but for us too." Daniel's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, a mix of uncertainty and curiosity, as if her words were both comforting and terrifying. He nodded slowly, not fully trusting his own emotions yet, but willing to try, and that was enough for Emma. The miles passed quickly, the scenery changing from familiar streets to rolling hills, forests turning amber with autumn leaves, and the tension in the car began to shift imperceptibly. Emma felt the subtle rise of hope, the kind that starts small and quiet but grows with each mile. Daniel began to speak, haltingly at first, about his sister, about the fights and misunderstandings they had never resolved. Each word was careful, measured, but it cracked the wall he had built around his heart. Emma listened, encouraging him with soft questions, with quiet nods, with the simple act of being present, showing him that she was ready to face the past with him, not against him. He admitted regrets he had buried for years, the guilt he carried for choosing avoidance over reconciliation, the fear that it was too late. Emma felt the ache in his voice, the longing for repair, and she realized that this journey wasn't only about his sister. It was about the years they had drifted apart, about the distance that had quietly taken root in their marriage. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush him, only offered her presence, and that was enough to coax him further into openness. Hours into the drive, the conversation shifted from the past to the present, and Emma felt the familiar flutter of connection as Daniel smiled briefly, laughed quietly at a memory, and reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let him hold it, the warmth between them a fragile thread connecting hearts that had grown apart. For a moment, the silence that returned was comfortable, filled with a sense of shared purpose, a quiet anticipation of what lay ahead. They stopped at a small diner for lunch, the kind with checkered tablecloths and the smell of coffee lingering in the air. Sitting across from each other, they began to talk about lighter things: work, neighbors, the simple rhythms of life. And Emma realized how much she had missed this. The feeling of him as a partner, a friend, a companion. Daniel watched her with something she hadn't seen for a long time, a mixture of admiration and cautious hope. The beginnings of trust returning. As they resumed the road, the miles slipping past under the wheels of the car, Emma felt a sense of purpose and urgency intertwine. The moment to see his sister was approaching, but so was a moment for them. It's a chance to rebuild the connection that had frayed over years of silence and avoidance. Evening came, and the first glimpses of the small Vermont town appeared, quaint and quiet, with narrow streets and warm lights in windows. Emma's heart raced as they approached the white cottage where Daniel's sister lived. The trees cast long shadows, and the air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of autumn's close. Emma parked the car and waited in the quiet, giving Daniel a moment to gather himself. She watched him approach the door, his steps hesitant yet determined, and felt a swell of pride and hope. She stayed outside, letting him face the first encounter alone, knowing it was necessary for him to speak and feel without interference. Inside, she could see through the window glimpses of movement, Daniel's shoulders rising and falling, hands gesturing, the emotional dance of siblings reconnecting after years of separation. Emma felt her heart thrum with emotion, witnessing the opening of a door that had been closed for far too long. Hours passed, and when Daniel emerged, his face was flushed, his eyes red, yet softened by relief and tentative joy. "She wants to see you," he said, turning to Emma. And she felt the weight of her involvement, the bridge she had helped build. On the drive back, the air was filled with quiet conversation. Small touches, shared glances, a sense of intimacy returning after months of emotional distance. Daniel reached for her hand, not hesitating this time, and Emma felt a spark of something long dormant. He spoke softly, admitting his fear of losing connection, his gratitude for her presence, and his desire to try again, to rebuild what had been neglected. Emma listened, her own heart swelling with the recognition that this journey had not only healed a family rift, but had begun to heal the silent wounds in their marriage. The road stretched ahead, darkening under the night sky. But the atmosphere in the car was lighter, charged with possibility and promise. Emma knew the work wasn't done, that conversations and emotional labor lay ahead. But the first steps had been taken, steps that neither of them could now ignore. She felt a quiet sense of triumph, the feeling that small acts of courage could ripple outward, touching hearts, healing wounds, and rekindling love that had been quietly waiting. The miles passed, yet Emma felt the journey had transformed into more than just a trip to see Daniel's sister. It had become a journey toward themselves, a reclaiming of trust, intimacy, and hope. Every word, every glance, every small laugh on the way back was a reminder that connection, once broken, could be rebuilt with patience, courage, and presence. As the lights of Maple Ridge reappeared in the distance, Emma realized that the real journey was only beginning. But for the first time in months, she felt ready, confident that together, they could face what lay ahead and begin writing a new chapter in their lives. Asterisk. The small white cottage came into view as the car wound through the quiet Vermont streets, lights glowing softly against the evening sky. Emma parked, her hands gripping the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary, feeling her heart pound with anticipation and nervous energy. She glanced at Daniel, who sat beside her with a mixture of apprehension and determination on his face. The letter still in his pocket, a symbol of the past and the chance for healing. They walked up the narrow path together, the crisp autumn air filling their lungs, carrying the scent of pine and earth, the world around them quiet, as if holding its breath for what was about to happen. Emma waited near the door, giving Daniel the space he needed, knowing that the first moment of reunion between siblings had to be his alone. She could see him through the window, the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he opened the door. And the instant the two saw each other, something shifted, a mix of shock, relief, and years of unspoken emotion spilling into a moment too long postponed. Laura, Daniel's sister, stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out. And Daniel's face softened in a way Emma hadn't seen in years. A combination of guilt, longing, and cautious hope. Emma felt tears prick at the corner of her eyes as she realized the weight of what was happening. She had not only brought the letter, but had guided Daniel to this moment, had nudged him to face what he had avoided for so long. She watched them talk, Laura's voice shaky but warm, Daniel's responses hesitant at first, but gradually flowing with honesty, emotion threading through every word. Time seemed to stretch and collapse simultaneously as Emma leaned against the doorframe, letting the siblings share their words, their apologies, their laughter, and the occasional choke of emotion, all blending into a moment that held years of absence and the fragile promise of reconciliation. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, Daniel stepped outside, his eyes red but shining, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He turned to Emma, a mixture of gratitude and awe in his gaze. "She wants to see you," he said softly, and the simplicity of the words carried a weight that made Emma's chest swell. Driving back, the night wrapping around them like a quiet blanket. The car was filled with a newfound closeness, a subtle warmth that had been absent for months. Daniel reached for her hand this time without hesitation, their fingers intertwining naturally, a silent promise of trust and reconnection. He spoke softly about his fears, his past avoidance, and the regret he had carried for years, each word weaving them closer together. Emma responded with quiet understanding, sharing her own feelings of distance, longing, and hope. The conversation flowing like a river, slowly eroding the walls that had built up between them. They laughed quietly at shared memories, at small things that reminded them of the life they had nearly let slip away. And Emma felt the old warmth return, gentle and steady, like sunlight after a long storm. She realized that the trip had been more than just about his sister, had been a journey to reclaim their bond, to face the unspoken truths, and to remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. The road stretched out ahead under the night sky, dark but not empty, filled instead with a sense of possibility and new beginnings. Emma watched Daniel's face in the dim light, noting how he seemed lighter, freer, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. And she felt a thrill of hope that this moment could mark the turning point in their relationship. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled not with tension, but with anticipation of what lay ahead. They spoke of plans, of small things they could do to rebuild trust and connection, each word strengthening the fragile threads of intimacy that had been strained over time. Emma felt a profound satisfaction of knowing that, sometimes, courage was not about grand gestures, but about presence, about showing up when it mattered most, about guiding someone you loved to face their fears. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes meeting hers with a vulnerability he hadn't allowed in months. And Emma felt a wave of emotion, the realization that love could be patient, persistent, and resilient, capable of weathering years of silence and hurt. She remembered Alex's role in all this, the young man who had entrusted her with the letter, who had unknowingly sparked the chain of events that led to this healing. And she felt gratitude for the quiet ways people can shape each other's lives. As they drove the remaining miles home, they shared small touches, soft words, and quiet smiles, each one reinforcing the bond that had almost been lost, each one signaling the beginning of something renewed. Emma knew there would still be challenges, conversations that required honesty, and moments of vulnerability that would test them, but she felt ready. The first step had been taken, the walls had begun to crumble, and the promise of a restored connection hung in the air, gentle but undeniable. They returned to Maple Ridge under the blanket of night, the familiar streets welcoming them, and Emma felt a sense of completion, a feeling that a chapter had closed while a new one began. Daniel's hand remained in hers, a silent commitment, and she could see the beginnings of hope in his eyes, a willingness to rebuild not only his relationship with his sister, but with her, with them. The house felt different as they entered, not empty or distant, but alive with possibility, with the quiet knowledge that love, patience, and courage had the power to change everything. Emma reflected on the journey, on the decisions made, on the bravery it had taken to guide Daniel to this moment. And she realized that she had not just helped him reconnect with his sister, but had also helped them reconnect with each other. With their past, present, and the future they could still build together. As they settled in for the night, the quiet of the home wrapping around them like a cocoon, Emma felt a deep satisfaction of a moment well lived, a step taken toward healing, and the promise that life could be beautiful again if they continued to face it together. In the darkness, she felt Daniel squeeze her hand gently, a wordless expression of trust, love, and gratitude. And she knew that the journey they had begun would continue, filled with challenges, growth, and moments of connection, but also with the enduring hope that had brought them back to each other. Emma realized that Alex hadn't asked for a miracle, But somehow, in his quiet way, he had set in motion a story that would change the course of their lives. That night, as they sat together in silence, hearts closer than they had been in years, Emma understood something profound. Sometimes love required patience, courage, and subtle guidance, and when those forces worked together, they could rebuild what had seemed irreparably broken, opening the door to a future full of possibility, warmth, and a love renewed.